We're going to go ahead and start off. This is considerations for developing your own system. So if you are looking at systems and you are thinking about either building your own or contracting, this will be a good session to kind of understand what are some of those decision points, because we don't know what we don't know, right? And so that's one of the big things that I've noticed working with districts across the country is that, you know, when they get into that part of wanting to buy the system, they don't know exactly how they're going to use it eventually. So having some of this in the back of your mind right now before you make that decision is something really important. Up here, I have Eric Meredith from the state of Montana. I'm going to skip over you, Sean, for a second. Ellis Ott from Fairbanks, Alaska. And Robin Deloach from the Willamette ESD in Salem, Oregon. And then Sean Hendrickson, who's going to join us as a practitioner with his practitioner presentation at the very end from St. Ignatius. So without further ado, I'm just going to go ahead and start us off with Ellis to start. And he's going to represent a district. So these are all, go ahead and hit Steve. And then you're shipping out. So these are all different versions of the system. Ellis is representing a district, and he built the system for Fairbanks, Alaska School District. Robin built the system for the Willamette ESD, which is a coalition of districts within the state of Oregon. And then Eric built the system for the state of Montana. So we'll have a lot of different perspectives here. So go ahead.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the early warning system I built within the school district of Fairbanks, Alaska, and the interventions that we coupled with that. So a little bit of detail about our school district. It's about 13,000 students in 36 schools. Dropout rate about 4%. Recent merit grad rates closer to 80%. About a third of our students are free or reduced price lunch, and as others have mentioned in other groups, that it's probably a little bit low because we have high school students having low rates of reporting for free and reduced price lunch. Special education services, 16%, about 3% English language learner. This next one is the race and ethnicity representation, and you may notice that I haven't put it in the pie chart. That's purposely. And that's because I'm representing multiple races when students identify multiple races, and I'm not going to get into too much detail about that here, but I do have a publicly available data dashboard within our school district that provides enrollment data across our district, by school, and all kinds of filtering, and includes some detail about race and ethnicity. I had a whole separate topic at it at another conference, and you can ask me questions about that with detail later. So I'm skipping forward in a little bit about the early warning system and starting with the two major predictors that I'm using, and that's attendance and GPA. And technically I've done a logistic regression with it and set, so like I said, the dropout rate is 4% across the district. And I said, when does the logistic regression say that chance would be 8%? And it comes out to a line, which is double the dropout rate, and then half on the other side to define my low, medium, and high-risk students. And so what this is doing is saying if your attendance rate is here, and here's your GPA, you're in the red zone. This is just a visual representation of that. So on top of that, that's just what I start with initially. I also take into account retention. Did they drop out before and come back? Credits versus grade level. I don't just identify whether or not they're on track. It's how far off they might be behind. So if they're 4 years in high school and they only have 2 credits, I see that differently as 4 years in high school than 18 credits. I see those as different. I look at how many grade levels they are behind. State and district assessments, out-of-school suspensions. Okay. And I do a little something. I won't go into detail about this either. You can ask me questions about it. I do a model for kindergarten through 12th grade, the entire system. I want it to be the option of, if you've heard that phrase, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So this leverages the system such that elementary can have interventions for those students. And the way I approach it is I equate the data so that our elementary kids' attendance rates might be higher on average than our older students. And so I take that into account in the model so that students in kindergarten through 12th grade do have a risk level designated for them. low, medium, and high. So I'm not going to go into too much detail about these, but I look at the two major numbers to look at. And some of you might be familiar with the language of sensitivity and specificity. So that 63% is just saying the percentage of dropouts that are identified by high risk is 63%. The 10% up there is that's how many non-dropouts that I was incorrect with and were identified as at risk. And that translates to a specificity of 90%. The accuracy is about 89%. You took how often I'm right using high risk out of the total, and that's what you come up with. The important piece of this is something to think about whenever you're thinking about early warning systems. Oftentimes there's that big piece that's left out, and that is you can talk about accuracy, but then you also have to talk about basically your two types of error. How many kids am I identifying? You know, you could identify half of your kid. You could say half of my kids are at risk and get more of your dropouts identified, but you've also over-identified quite a few students. And in my model, I've only identified 12% of students, and I would say there's a difference between 12% have been flagged for risk versus 60% have been flagged for risk. Okay? I would have 100% accuracy, not accuracy, but 100% of dropouts identified if I said everybody's at risk. But I massively over-identify. The importance of that is I want them working with the kids that actually need the support. Okay? I want to narrow it down. The idea is I want to go out and I want to help students. I want to help the students that are at risk. And so I'm trying to narrow down that group using the data to say, I've saved you some time. Here's your group to focus and look at. So the high-risk group of students, that red group of students, have a higher performance gap than any other demographic group we can think of, even ones that we don't collect data on, I would argue. So I say that it levels the playing field, and I found that dropout rates can be cut in half with interventions. Okay, and I'm not saying that in general. That's something I've done analysis with. So that's our dropout rate over time. We're in a good place right now at 3.5%. And I'll go into more detail why we see this little red section here when I did some analysis of a program earlier. So we'll have to go through the timeline. But in our student information system, here's our demographic, our demo student, Peter Pup, a little puppy there, that we use as a demo. And this is a data screen that shows all the dropout risk model data, you know, whether or not they were retained, what grade level they were in, how far they were behind in their grade levels relative to high school specifically, their attendance, GPA. I have a dropout risk probability that's based on the GPA and attendance. And also has a historic dropout risk data. So you could have a student that has, I think it's like 10 or 11 years worth of risk data. So I've said to the groups of social workers that specify work on this, there's more than them that work on this, but I say to them, you know, if you've got a high-risk kid and they've always been high-risk, you might look at that differently than one that's been low-risk for a while and is only recently high-risk. Or mixed. Okay, timeline, 0809. As some of you are in evaluation or accountability or research departments, often what happens, at least for me, is, hey, I got this program, can you show me it works? Well, okay, so that's kind of how the early warning system came up, because I asked them, you know, I'm not going to just look at your dropout rate for your kids, because it was called the Dropout Prevention Program at the time, because the kids you selected because they're highly likely to drop out. So tell me how you chose them. And so through that process of figuring out how they chose them, because they said, oh, their attendance rate is below this value, they have at least one F, they're not proficient in the state assessment, I came up with two things. I said, one, your effectiveness is awesome. It's you're reducing dropout rates by 50% versus comparable students, okay, in our district. And two, you could be more effective. Because what I also found was you're serving kids with high GPAs that don't have as much need for your service as others. And so I argued you will impact our district's dropout rate by triple, your effectiveness will triple if you focus your attention on what my early warning system says is a high risk student. That program was grant funded. Unfortunately, that grant funding ended, but we still have the early warning system operating in our district. And if you notice, there was in that little screen, there's a little red dot. There's little green, yellow, and red dots in our student information system that tells people at least quickly, okay, where's that kid? If they want to dive into that more further, and you saw that little screen. Okay. In 15-16, I presented to the local school board on the early warning system, talked about impacts, and said we need to be doing something about it. And I got their attention. In 17-18, we had a social service manager program at the beginning. A case study on that work, as well as I'm participating in the NCES forum. So guide to early warning system. So as she was saying, if you're interested in that, that's a good thing to take a look at because it's from practitioners across the nation, representatives from LEAs and SEAs. Just Google NCS Forum Guide Early Warning System, you can find it. And I think I have the link there too. We went live recently, so every night it takes into account what was their attendance and their grades, and recently it incorporates it into the model. So it takes in the last 2 years plus whatever we have currently, and aggregates all of that. Our state of Alaska, the state education agency, just got a grant to support the work that we're doing. So we're going to have 5 more licensed clinicians. Okay.
Yeah, 2 minutes time.
2 minutes? All right. Preventing dropout is a return on investment. That's the argument I've made is one less student that's dropping out and comes back to school is more funding. So I argued if you do this efficiently, you could have a system, a program that pays for itself. Okay, so we have this new social service manager program that's addressing a lot of things other than just dropout. It's social emotional learning, mental health trauma recovery, and their focus is on high-risk students. Because I'm hoping that, I'm theorizing, I don't have evidence of this yet, because it would be really hard to do that, and I'd love to see research on it, that the high-risk student is also more likely to have adverse childhood experiences. I think that's possible. Right. So we have a shortage of social service managers, is what that's saying. And so our effort is to get more social workers in our schools. We don't have enough. And their focus is on helping those high-risk students. This letter from the field, I'm not going to read the whole thing. The basic idea is because of the early warning system, they look at the student, hey, I want to talk to you. The student says, I'm homeless. I'm living in a car. And so I think there's a strong possibility that that student may not have come forward. And so there's situations where the early warning system can leverage finding what students need. It may not have come to that student. Students don't always come forward with what support they need. So that's a positive little story there from one of our social service managers.